The sound came first, metal scraping against metal, chains dragging through dirt. Then the scream, raw, defiant, quickly silenced. Through the rising dust, the scene unfolded with stark brutality. A wagon jolted across the rugged Wyoming terrain. Two men slouched on the seat, whiskey bottles flashing in the sun. Behind the wagon, chained to the rear axle, a woman stumbled through clouds of dust. Each time she fell, the chain yanked her forward, tearing at her bleeding wrists. Her dress hung in tatters, exposing brown skin scraped raw. Her black hair, matted with blood and dirt, couldn't hide the fire in her eyes, a spirit refusing to break. Ethan Blackwood reined his bay gelding hard, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. At 31, his face already carried the weathered lines of a man who'd seen too much. A jagged scar cut across his left cheek, a permanent reminder of Antietam, where Confederate steel had claimed both his flesh and his brother's life. "God damn it," he muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the Springfield Model 1873 in his saddle scabbard. Since leaving the blue uniform behind, he'd built a quiet existence on his small cattle spit near the Powder River. The Springfield had gathered dust, just as he'd wanted. The war had taught him that violence solved nothing. That lesson had cost him enough blood. Still, some things a man couldn't ride past. He counted the men. Two visible, likely more in the wagon bed. He recognized them immediately. The Duncan brothers, Wade and Reese. Notorious bounty hunters who specialized in capturing Apache and other natives, selling them to mines and plantations. Men who operated on the bleeding edge of the law, where badges looked the other way if the price was right. Ethan nudged his horse down the ridge, his heart pounding not from fear but cold certainty. This would end badly for someone. The calculations ran through his mind with military precision. Distance, angles, cover. His fingers flexed, muscle memory from a life he tried to leave behind. He dismounted 20 yards out, leading his horse forward. Better to appear less threatening. Better to keep both hands visible. "Well, look what the prairie shit out," Wade Duncan called, grinning through tobacco-stained teeth. Another hero come to die. His hand rested casually on his holstered Remington. Reese, the quieter brother, already had his Winchester across his knees, watching Ethan's approach with dead eyes. "Cut her loose," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the distance with quiet authority. "She's Apache property," Wade spat. "Caught stealing. The law's on our side." "There's no law out here that chains women like dogs," Ethan replied. "Then make yourself scarce, soldier boy," Reese warned, raising his rifle slightly. "Unless you're aiming to feed the vultures." Ethan sized them up. Wade, drunk and reckless. Reese, coldly calculating. He could likely take one, maybe both if luck favored him, but not without blood, maybe not without dying. He'd seen enough death. "One last time," Ethan said. "Cut her loose." When neither moved, he stepped toward the wagon's rear, each boot deliberately placed. Dust swirled around his ankles as the wind picked up. His hand moved to his belt, drawing his Bowie knife, 8 inches of military steel that had seen more use skinning deer than men in recent years. "You touch that chain, you're dead," Wade threatened, drawing his pistol. Ethan kept moving, positioning himself between the woman and the brothers. He crouched, feeling their gun sights on his back. One wrong move meant death. He worked the knife against the chain link, metal scraping metal. "I said—" Wade's threat was cut short as the woman suddenly kicked dirt into his face. That split-second distraction was all Ethan needed. The chain gave way with a loud clank. The woman collapsed forward, catching herself on bloodied palms. She looked up at Ethan, and what struck him wasn't fear or gratitude, it was dignity. She rose shakily to her feet, her eyes never leaving his. "My name is Naya," she said in perfect English, her voice steady despite her cracked lips. "And I am no one's property." Ethan blinked in surprise but nodded. Ethan Blackwood. He turned to face the Duncans, knife still in hand, body positioned to shield Naya. Wade had his Remington leveled at Ethan's chest, while Reese aimed the Winchester at his head. "You just stole $500 from us, Blackwood," Wade snarled. "That's more than enough reason to plant you. You pull those triggers, one of you dies for certain," Ethan said, his voice deadly calm. "Maybe both. Is she worth that gamble?" The standoff stretched, seconds bleeding into a full minute. No one moved. The only sound was the wind and the nervous shuffling of the mules. Ethan's pulse remained steady, the eerie calm before battle he remembered too well. Finally, Reese lowered his rifle slightly. "Let it go, Wade. Plenty more where she came from." Wade's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Blackwood. Mark my words." "The trail west is clear," Ethan replied evenly. "I suggest you take it." With a string of curses, Wade yanked the reins. The wagon lurched forward, dust billowing as they drove away. Ethan didn't holster his knife until they were specks on the horizon. Only then did he turn to Naya. She stood unsteadily, wrists raw and bleeding, but her chin remained high. Without a word, Ethan removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders, covering the shredded remains of her dress. "My cabin's an hour's ride," he said, offering his canteen. "Can you make it?" She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her dark eyes assessing him. "Why?" she asked simply. The question hung between them. Why risk his life for a stranger? Why involve himself in business that wasn't his? "Some chains need breaking," he answered finally. "Doesn't matter who wears them." Something passed between them, understanding perhaps, or recognition. Two souls who'd seen too much of humanity's darker nature. She nodded once. "Then yes, I can make it." The cabin was modest but sturdy. Pine logs chinked with mud and straw, a stone chimney, and a small corral for the horses. Inside, a single room served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space, a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with two chairs, a narrow bunk, and shelves lined with essential supplies. It wasn't much, but it was solid, like Ethan himself. Naya sat at the table while Ethan tended the fire and put water on to boil. She watched his movements, efficient, deliberate, taking the measure of this man who'd risked his life for hers. "The water will be hot soon," he said, setting a basin and clean cloth before her. "For your wrists." She nodded, then winced as she removed his coat. The torn dress barely covered her. Without comment, Ethan retrieved a clean shirt from a trunk and placed it beside her. "I'll step outside," he said, moving toward the door. "No need," she replied, surprising him. "I have no shame in my body. The shame belongs to those who would chain it." She changed quickly, her movement speaking of pain she refused to voice. The shirt hung loose on her frame, but it covered her with dignity. When she sat again, Ethan placed bread, dried meat, and a jar of honey before her. "Eat," he said simply. She didn't need to be told twice. She ate with restraint at first, then with growing hunger as her body demanded sustenance. "You fought in the war," she said between bites, nodding toward the faded blue coat hanging by the door. "Union." Ethan nodded, pouring coffee. "6th Massachusetts, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville." "My father fought white men too," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "Different war, same result." The kettle whistled. Ethan poured the hot water into the basin, then sat across from her. "Your wrists need tending." Without waiting for permission, she submerged her hands in the steaming water, not flinching despite the pain it must have caused. The water turned pink with her blood. "They said you stole," Ethan said, not accusingly. Naya's eyes flashed. "They raided a farm near our hunting grounds, killed the farmer. took his goods. I was gathering herbs nearby and saw it all. She paused. When they left, I took bread from the ruins for hungry children in our camp. Her jaw tightened. They returned, caught me, and called me thief. Ethan nodded, unsurprised. The Duncans aren't known for their honesty. They killed 7 of our men who tried to stop them from taking me, she added, her voice flat, including my brother. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Ethan had suspected as much. The Duncans rarely took prisoners without bloodshed, but hearing it confirmed tightened something in his chest. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate. Why help me? She asked again, more insistent this time. Most white men look away. Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, where the last light of day was fading. During the war, I saw officers order Apache camps raided. Women and children. He stopped, the memories cutting fresh. I followed orders, told myself it wasn't my place to question. His fist clenched on the table. Been trying to live with that ever since. Naya studied him, her eyes softening slightly. So I am your redemption. No, he said firmly, looking back at her. You're not anybody's anything. That's the point. She held his gaze, then nodded once, something like respect crossing her features. As night fell, Ethan prepared the bunk for her, laying his bedroll near the hearth for himself. She accepted the arrangement without argument, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. In the darkness, Ethan lay awake, rifle within reach, listening to her breathing. Questions plagued him. Would the Duncans return? What would happen to her? The land was unforgiving to everyone, but especially to a lone Apache woman. Yet one thing was certain. He'd made his choice when he'd cut that chain. Whatever came next, he'd face it. Days passed. Naya's strength returned rapidly. Her wrists began to heal, leaving rings of pink scar tissue that would forever mark where the chains had been. She helped around the cabin without being asked, sweeping, tending the fire, carrying water. One evening, Ethan returned from checking the herd to find her examining his collection of books with surprise. You read many books, she observed. Helps pass the winters, he replied, hanging his hat. My father sent me to the mission school, she said, tracing a finger along the spine of a volume. Before he decided their god was another form of chains. Her English suddenly made sense. You read too, then? She nodded. And right. The missionaries said I learned faster than any student they'd had. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. It angered them when my father took me back. Another piece of her story fell into place. She was the daughter of a chief, educated, trained in healing. Not just any captive, but a woman of status among her people. That night, as a storm rolled in from the mountains, the roof began to leak. Ethan climbed onto the table, hammering a loose board back into place. The hammer slipped, striking his knuckles. Blood welled instantly. Before he could react, Naya was beside him, taking his injured hand in hers. She led him to the table and examined the wound with clinical precision. You need stitches, she said matter-of-factly. She retrieved a small pouch from her dress, something she'd kept hidden, and removed several plants. She crushed the leaves, mixed them with water, and applied the paste to his hand. The pain subsided almost immediately. Where did you learn this? He asked, watching her work. My grandmother was a healer, she replied, threading a bone needle with sinew from her pouch. I was to take her place. She began stitching his wound with practiced ease. Hold still. Ethan watched her work, struck by the reversal. Now she was helping him, with skills he couldn't match. Her fingers moved deftly, closing the gash with tiny, precise stitches. Your people lost a gifted healer when the Duncans took you, he observed. Something flickered in her eyes, pain perhaps, or longing. My people are scattered now. The soldiers came 3 moons ago. Those who survived fled to the mountains. Another weight added to the burden Ethan carried, more consequences of a war that never truly ended. When she finished, she bound his hand with a clean strip of cloth. Her fingers lingered on his wrist, the touch light but deliberate. Their eyes met, a current passing between them. The storm intensified, wind howling around the cabin like vengeful spirits. Inside, the fire cast dancing shadows across the walls. Neither moved for a long moment. "I should check the horses," Ethan said finally, breaking the spell. Naya's hand fell away. "Yes, you should." A week later, as Ethan's supplies dwindled, they made the journey to Timber Creek, the nearest settlement. Naya wore Ethan's spare clothes, her hair tied back, her chin held high despite the stares that followed them down the muddy main street. The general store, run by Eleanor Ellie Parker, was their first stop. Ellie, a widow who'd lost her husband at Shiloh, raised an eyebrow at the sight of them, but offered a curt nod. "Blackwood," she greeted. "Been a while." "Mrs. Parker," Ethan replied, removing his hat. "Need flour, coffee, salt, and—" He glanced at Naya. "Calico, if you have it." Ellie's gaze lingered on Naya, assessing but not unkind. "Got some bolts in the back. Might find something suitable." While Ethan gathered supplies, Naya wandered the store, her fingers brushing over fabrics she had no money to purchase. Ellie approached her, voice low. "You're with Blackwood by choice?" she asked directly. Naya's eyes flashed. "I am with no one. I stay where I choose." Ellie studied her, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Man needs someone to keep him honest." She selected a bolt of deep blue calico and pressed it into Naya's hands, along with thread and needles. "Take it. Winter's coming, and that shirt won't keep you warm." Naya blinked in surprise. "Why would you help me?" "Lost my man to senseless killing," Ellie replied. "Figure that's enough hate for one lifetime." As they left the store, a tall figure in a worn duster approached from the sheriff's office. Marshal Cohen, his badge dull against the faded material of his coat, nodded in recognition. "Blackwood," he called. "Thought that was your gelding." Ethan shook the offered hand. "Cohen, didn't know you'd taken the badge here." 8 months now." Cohen's eyes shifted to Naya, then back to Ethan. "You two should come by the office before you leave." The lawman's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Ethan glanced at Naya, who gave a slight nod. Inside the small sheriff's office, Cohen closed the door and leaned against his desk. "Word travels," he said without preamble. "Duncan brothers are claiming you stole their property." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not property." "I know that," Cohen said sharply. "But they've got papers, forged most likely, saying otherwise." He looked at Naya. "Mind telling me your side?" "Ma'am?" Naya stepped forward, meeting his gaze directly. She recounted the massacre at her camp, the Duncans' theft from the farm, her capture, and the brutal treatment that followed. She spoke with quiet dignity that seemed to impress the lawman. When she finished, Cohen nodded slowly. "Matches what I've been hearing about those two." He pulled a wanted poster from his desk. "They've got warrants in 3 counties now. Kidnapping, murder, gun running." He handed it to Ethan. "But they've got friends in high places. Bounty hunting's profitable for certain interests." "What does that mean for her?" Ethan asked. "Means watch your back," Cohen replied grimly. "They won't let this go." He turned to Naya. "According to territorial law, you're a free woman. No one can claim you as property, papers or not. But law's only as good as those enforcing it." "And if they come?" she asked. Cohen's hand rested on his holstered Colt. "Then they answer to me, or to him." He nodded toward Ethan. "Knowing Blackwood's reputation, I'd bet on him." Ethan frowned. "What reputation?" "6th Massachusetts sharpshooters," Cohen said with a hint of a smile. 27 confirmed kills at Antietam alone. Word gets around." The reminder of his past hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd tried to bury that part of himself, but it seemed some ghosts refused to stay down. On the ride home, snow began to fall, thick flakes that promised a heavy accumulation. Naya pulled Ethan's coat tighter around her shoulders. "He spoke of you as a killer," she said finally. "Is that who you were?" Ethan stared at the trail ahead. "For a time. And now? Now I'm trying to be something else." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "As am I." The snow had just begun to melt when Ethan spotted the dust on the horizon. 5 riders approaching the cabin, moving with purpose. He recognized the slouched silhouettes immediately. The Duncan brothers had returned, and they'd brought reinforcements. Ethan checked his Springfield, counting his ammunition. 20 rounds. Enough if his aim held true. It would have to be. Inside, Naya was mending one of his shirts, her nimble fingers working the needle with practiced ease. She looked up as he entered, reading his expression instantly. "They've come," she said. Not a question. 5 of them, he confirmed, retrieving his pistol from the trunk. "You should hide in the root cellar." Naya set aside her sewing and stood, her movement deliberate. Without a word, she walked to the wall and took down the Henry rifle that hung there. "I will not hide," she said, checking the weapon with unexpected familiarity. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. I've killed men before." Ethan studied her, seeing not just determination, but competence. This wasn't bravado. It was the calm certainty of someone who knew their capabilities. "Stay inside," he said finally. "If it goes badly, there's a trail through the northern ridge. Follow it to Cohen." She nodded once, taking position by the window. "It won't go badly." Ethan stepped onto the porch as the riders entered the yard, spreading out in a half circle before the cabin. Wade Duncan led them, his face twisted with malice. "Blackwood," he called. "Bring out our property, and maybe you'll live to see sunset." "She's not property," Ethan replied evenly. "And she's not coming with you." Wade spat. "We got papers saying different, signed by the territorial governor himself." "Papers bought with blood money," Ethan countered. "Not worth the ink they're printed with." Reese Duncan raised his rifle. "Enough talk. Step aside or die where you stand." Ethan didn't move. His hands remained at his sides, though every muscle was coiled, ready. "I've notified Marshal Cohen about your visit. He's probably on his way now with deputies." "Won't be nothing left for him to find but bodies," Wade sneered, drawing his pistol. Before he could aim, the cabin door opened. Naya stepped out, the Henry rifle raised to her shoulder with the practiced ease of someone born to the weapon. "No," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "No more chains. No more captives." The sight of her, armed, defiant, seemed to stun the Duncans. They'd expected a cowering victim, not a warrior. "You got one chance," Ethan said into the silence. "Right away. Don't come back." Wade's face contorted with rage. "You think you can—" The crack of a rifle shot cut him off. One of the Duncan's men screamed, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his horse. Ethan whirled to see Naya, the Henry still at her shoulder, smoke curling from the barrel. "That was a warning," she called. "The next one won't be." Chaos erupted. Ethan drew and fired in one fluid motion, catching another rider in the leg. Wade and Reese dove from their horses, seeking cover behind the water trough. Bullets splintered the porch railing as Ethan pulled Naya back into the doorway. "I told you I could shoot," she said, calmly reloading. A grim smile touched Ethan's lips. "So you did." The firefight lasted minutes that stretched like hours. Ethan and Naya, sheltered by the cabin's thick logs, held their ground. 2 of the Duncans' men lay wounded in the yard. A third had fled on horseback. Only the brothers remained, pinned down but defiant. "You can't win this, Duncan," Ethan called. 2 of your men are bleeding out. One's run. You're finished." "Never," Wade shouted back. I'll see you both dead first." Just then, hoofbeats thundered from the east. Marshal Cohen galloped into view, flanked by 4 deputies, rifles ready. "Duncan!" Cohen's voice boomed across the yard. "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." For a tense moment, it seemed Wade might choose death over surrender. Then Reese grabbed his brother's arm, saying something urgent. Slowly, Wade's pistol appeared, tossed onto the ground. Reese's rifle followed. "Come out with your hands high," Cohen ordered. The brothers emerged, hands raised, hatred burning in their eyes. "This ain't over," Wade snarled as Cohen's deputies handcuffed him. "Yes, it is," Cohen replied, dismounting. "You're wanted for murder in 3 counties. Judge Calloway's been looking for an excuse to hang you for years." He turned to Ethan and Naya, who had stepped onto the porch. "You two all right?" Ethan nodded, his arm unconsciously protective around Naya's shoulders. "We're fine." Cohen eyed the wounded men. "My deputy's a fair hand at doctoring. He'll patch them up enough to stand trial." He looked at Naya with newfound respect. "Nice shooting, ma'am." "It wasn't my first choice," she replied quietly. "Rarely is," Cohen agreed, "but sometimes it's the only one left." 2 weeks after the Duncans were taken to Fort Laramie to await trial, Ethan sat at the table, turning something over in his hands. A simple band hammered from a silver coin, polished to a soft gleam. His fingers, calloused from years of ranch work, seemed too rough for such a delicate object. Naya entered from outside carrying herbs she'd gathered from the ridge. She'd taken to exploring the area, bringing back plants for her growing collection of medicines. Several people from nearby homesteads had already sought her healing skills. She set the plants on the table and noticed the ring in his hands. Her movements stilled. "I'm not good with words," Ethan said, his voice low. "Never have been, but I know when something matters." He looked up at her. "You matter. Not because I saved you, not because you've saved me, but because of who you are." He held out the ring. "I don't ask this lightly, and I'll understand if your answer is no, but I want you to stay, not as someone passing through, but as my wife, if you'll have me." Naya's eyes, usually so guarded, softened. She took the ring, examining it carefully, then looked back at him. "Among my people," she said, "a man who wishes to marry must prove himself worthy to the woman's family." A sad smile touched her lips. "My family is gone now, but I have judged you myself." She slid the ring onto her finger. "And I find you worthy, Ethan Blackwood." The simplicity of her acceptance struck him more powerfully than any elaborate declaration could have. He stood and took her hands in his, the silver band catching the firelight. "I can't replace what you've lost," he said softly. "Nor I what you have lost," she replied. "But perhaps together we can build something new." 1 year later, Ethan stood on the porch of his expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. The property had changed. A new barn stood beside the corral. The herd had doubled, and a small garden of medicinal herbs flourished behind the cabin. Inside, what had once been a Spartan bachelor's quarters had transformed. Colorful weavings adorned the walls. The scent of cooking filled the air, and a small cradle stood near the fire, awaiting the child that would arrive with the spring. Twice a month, people from miles around came seeking Naya's healing skills. Homesteaders, cowboys, and even Apache families who'd heard that the daughter of Chief Black Hawk practiced medicine again. And when trouble threatened the scattered native camps, word would reach Ethan, who had become something of an unofficial protector in the region. Marshal Cohen rode up the trail, dismounting with a nod to Ethan. "Brought news," he said, joining him on the porch. "Wade Duncan hanged last week in Cheyenne. Reese got 20 years. He handed Ethan a newspaper. "There's more. Territorial legislature passed a new law. Makes it illegal to chain or transport natives without proper authority from a federal judge." He tapped the paper. "They cited your case specifically." A quiet satisfaction settled in Ethan's chest. Won't stop everyone. No, Cohen agreed. But it's a start. Naya emerged from the cabin, her belly swollen with child. She handed Cohen a small packet of herbs. For your cough, she said. Brew it with honey, drink it hot. Cohen accepted it with a grateful nod. Much obliged, Mrs. Blackwood. Doctor and Laramie couldn't do a thing for it. As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Naya stood beside Ethan, her hand finding his. The silver ring glinted on her finger, and beneath it, the scars on her wrist had faded to thin white lines, visible only if you knew to look. Perhaps people can change, Ethan said, looking out over the land that had once seemed as empty as his life. And this land with them. Naya's fingers tightened around his. The chains are broken, she said softly, for both of us. Neither one bound, both choosing to hold on. The end.